Guys, I'm super excited to introduce you to Deborah Alma. Deborah and I just came to become good friends, and I'm super excited she joined the Ripple Effect podcast. I want to give you just a really quick breakdown of her because she's super fascinating and interesting. Deborah Alma is a UK poet, editor, and teacher. She has worked using poetry with people with dementia, in hospice care, with vulnerable women's groups, and with children in schools. From 2012, she was the emergency poet offering poetry on prescription from her vintage ambulance, which is super cool. She co-founded the world's first walk-in poetry pharmacy in Shropshire, England, with her partner, poet James Sheard, in 2019. A mix of the therapeutic and the theatrical, Deborah offers consultations inside the poetry pharmacy and prescribes poems as cures, as well as dispensing poemcetamols. She's going to help me with that word, and other poetic pills and treatments. She is the editor of Emergency Poet and Anti-Stress Poetry Anthology, hashtag #MeToo Rallying Against Sexual Harassment, a woman's poetry anthology, 10 Poems of Happiness, and co-edited with Dr. Katie Amiel. These are the hands poems from the heart of the NHS. Her first full collection, Dirty Laundry, is published by Nine Arches Press. Super excited to have her join the Ripple Effect podcast, so let's dive in. Hey, how's it going?
Hello, Steve. I'm fine. How are you?
I am doing great. Well, this says we're live, but we're not live, so no worries.
Okay.
I was just doing your intro because thank you for sending that to me, and I'll edit it. But you have this word that I cannot seem to pronounce. This poemcetamols. Am I saying that right?
No, there's have you in the UK we have a really common drug, paracetamol. Do you have that in the US, paracetamol?
I've never heard of it.
Okay, well, in the UK, so it's a pun on paracetamol. It's poemcetamol.
Oh, okay.
I would just say poems in pills if I were you.
Oh, that's an L. So I clearly need to have my eyes. I will go back and now that I know, I'll pronounce it correctly in the intro.
Okay, go and try it.
Yep, it's poemcetamol, right?
Poemcetamol. But it's only funny if you know about paracetamol.
Okay.
Otherwise, it's not funny.
Well, it's kind of funny because it's a funny word. At least for my audience, it will be a tongue twister.
Okay.
Well, I am super excited to have you join the Ripple Effect podcast, and it's so great to meet you. Finally, I feel like I know you because we've been corresponding via email for a while now.
Yeah, and it's great to be here, although slightly, unexpected. I don't know how you heard about the poetry pharmacy.
Well, it's a funny story. So I have a friend that is very much into poetry, and she's actually helping me with some of what we're doing with the Ripple Effect. And we were talking about inspiring people that are out there creating ripples. And she said, "Have you ever heard of the poetry pharmacy?" And I've said, "No, I have not, but it sounds interesting." So she told me to look it up. I looked it up, and I was just instantly hooked on the website and what you're doing. And I have never been to the UK, but now I have a purpose to go, and I can't wait to come visit you face to face because what you do is amazing. And talk about the kind of, we talk about the ripple effect. You are creating positive ripples for anybody that comes in your door or gets to know you. So I was super excited to have you join as a guest today.
Thank you. It's a slightly odd place, so yeah. And when people are interested, I can't quite believe it, but thank you.
Yeah. Well, so let's start there. I'm a big believer in the origin story for all my guests, and so I would love to know kind of how you became who you are today, and then ultimately what inspired you to. I know you were based on the bio, you were doing this out of a vintage ambulance initially before you got a brick and mortar store with your partner. So I'm anxious to how that evolved. But really, has poetry been a part of your life since you were a child, or how did it come to be a thing for you?
Yeah, I guess like most children, we grow up with nursery rhymes and verse, and picture books, which are poetry. So no more than anyone else, maybe. My grandmother used to read poetry, and then I went to secondary school, and I think I was put off poetry because people are, I don't know if it's the same in the US, but in the UK, we're asked to pull poetry apart to try and understand it. And I think
Yep.
quite often, and kind of old dead white men usually, and it it puts you off. And yeah, I work for a publisher and have always read poetry. And then years later, in my 40s, went to do a creative writing degree and thought I was going to write a novel. But I had young kids, and I realized that, poetry was, you could finish it quicker, and, that condensed form worked really well for me.
That's great. Well, so the back in school, like, that really resonates with me because I had a teacher here in elementary school, probably about third or fourth grade, that really took a shine to poetry, and because of that, I really kind of fell in love with poetry in its own form, because she would bring in these unique books and she would read it, and you might not be able to completely understand, all of the prose and understand exactly the purpose of the poem. But I remember even as a young, boy, I was, trying to figure out what the author was trying to mean. And I loved it. Then I get into middle school and high school here. And exactly like you said, they kind of force it on you to dissect it. And although the dissection and understanding what the purpose and the meaning behind it was certainly important, it really took away from the joy of, appreciating it for the work it was. And so for a long time, I didn't actually really, go back and think of it as a something that I would do for pleasure, and only have recently, probably in the last 4 or 5 years, tried to read a little bit more and become more uh, adept at reading it, and how much I enjoy it, because it
Yeah.
really is like you said, in most cases they're shorter, than reading a regular book, but you have these little snippets and glimpses into what the poet's trying to tell you.
Yeah, and I think that's true. We by pulling it apart, you lose that kind of that magic and the mystery, and being allowed to stay with it being mysterious. And yeah, and that, I kind of guess that's why I started to share it with people, was to, once I'd kind of found it again for myself, I wanted to say to people who are equally put off, actually there is poetry out there that you'll enjoy. And I literally got in an ambulance and got on the road and took it to them.
So how did you come up with that concept, that idea, in order to first, how did people learn about it, and then ultimately how did you eventually make these emergency poetry calls, I guess is what we would call them, right?
Yeah, it's quite an odd story. I guess that I was working with people with dementia using poetry to assist communication,
Wow.
because for lots of reasons, poetry is an ideal way to talk to people. You're communicating with them intimately, but it's bite size. They don't have to remember the beginning of the story.
Yep.
And
Yep.
also I was helping them to make their own poetry from their words. So what I was learning in doing that was about listening really carefully to people, and I worked for a few years in care homes, and learnt how poetry could change their mood, could take them to another place
Wow.
really quickly, and that shift in mood could last for a few hours with somebody. You could
Wow.
actually, take them on a picnic, or take them to the sea, or fly a kite with them in their imagination. Yeah, and I was doing something. I was looking on eBay, as you do. I thought, I quite fancy buying an old camper van. I didn't have any money. I was a single parent at the time, and I came across this vintage ambulance, a 1950s Morris ambulance, and on a whim, just decided to bid for it. And
Uh-huh.
my friends were saying, "No, Deb, don't do it," and I did it anyway. Yeah, and then the 1950s ambulance was terrible, so I upgraded to a 1970s ambulance.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, I took it to a poetry festival, and then I got invited to another poetry festival, and then another two poetry festivals, and I was able to give up my sensible job and and then make a living being an emergency poet.
Wow.
There was a book and some media attention, which was unexpected, and and off it went. That's
Yeah.
how.
Well, what a fascinating concept. And so what was, during those early days when you were going around in the ambulance, what was, based on your experience, obviously being in a position to help people that were in dementia or dealing with a health crisis, how did that shift relative to what you were doing with the ambulance? Was that a different set of clientele that was learning about you and saying, I need this because I'm maybe suffering through depression or a hard time, and you would come on demand, so to speak, to read them poetry?
It's a really good question. I was carrying on doing the work with people with dementia, and I did some work with people with sight loss and also in hospice care, doing the similar thing. But the ambulance is a piece of theatre. It was literally to, people see an ambulance and they go, "What's going on here?" And
Yeah.
and I would invite them in, but I was invited to take the ambulance to schools, libraries, mental health events, a loneliness charity. But it was a way for people to come in and talk to somebody in a kind of non-judgmental way.
Yeah.
So even though I would go to arts festivals and literary festivals, I would also still do the work, in kind of more unusual settings. And it's I think there's, I don't pretend that it's therapy. It's a kind of pastiche of a therapy session.
Sure.
Very deliberately, it's deliberately light, but at the heart of it, it has meaning. It has, good quality poetry and wise words, and there's a gift of a poem to someone and a gift of listening as well. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
Just what I talk about with the Ripple is finding that way to connect with another person, right? At a deeper, more meaningful level, where you're connecting not only with your head, but also your heart. And what I find with poetry, especially if someone were to, like what you were doing, bring that to me, it really creates a fairly intimate moment in terms of the exchange. And the fact that somebody is coming and sharing this, it automatically kind of brings you a little bit closer. And what would you say were a few lessons that you kind of took away from those early days when you started doing it, and kind of on call and for these festivals and events?
What I learned was, it was a slightly frivolous idea in the first place, and other people took it more seriously maybe than I had done. And what I realized was that it worked, that there was some magic going on. And I learned that it had meaning for people, that I learned to get very good at establishing an intimate connection with somebody without being invasive, sort of a kind of way round. And that and that it people came back, people changed some of their daily practices. I asked questions about how they relax, favorite places, idealized states, so that the experience is a really positive one. And then at the end of that, when I asked them, is there anything you'd like me to give you a poem for, they might, at that point, because you've established an intimate and positive connection, they will open up and they'll say, I have anxiety, or I'm suffering from grief or whatever. And then the poem addresses that. It's not me saying do this or do that. The poem can speak to them, and they can take it away, and it becomes their poem. But I learned that it's a kind of magic that worked, and I didn't expect it to
Absolutely. Well, it's interesting. One of the events I do for the Ripple is a function called the 8-minute Ripple, which is kind of networking for non-networking people. And mainly because in a business environment where you have that elevator pitch and there's this pomp and circumstance, and you always feel, at least for me, I always felt it was a little bit dirty, right? Because somebody's trying to put a business card in my hand, or
Yeah.
trying to,
Yeah.
sort of determine whether I was a potential victim for their product or service. And that
You
wasn't
don't
great.
trust it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was, yeah, for me, it just didn't work. And so when we first brought out my book, it was really, I wanted to give people a different appreciation for the power of connection, because if you can get somebody to open up, oftentimes, and it sounds like you're very gifted at that. It's a question that gives you a little bit of a glimpse into who they are as an individual. And I always tell people that at the Ripple, we have these fun Ripple connection questions that are fun to ask, but they're fun to also answer. And
Yeah.
they hopefully will help you arrive at what we call a connection point, which is that thing that makes that person in that moment unique to you. And it has so much nothing to do with business. It has so much to do with human to human connection, right? And like you said, very much like your experience, is there is that magic in the moment. And for the person that's participating, it's almost as enlightening and almost as rewarding as the other person who's actually sharing their story or their input.
Yeah, because it's real. It's,
Yeah.
you're properly present. I'm not pretending to be some wise person, sitting back. I'm properly there and properly interested, and learning from them as they're talking about their lives and thinking, oh yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I have to ask, because the logistics of this really, it fascinates me. But you're driving around in these 2 vintage ambulances, you're going to these events and these festivals and then people's homes. Did you just carry a crazy amount of poetry books with you, or how did you know how to be ready for whoever might pop up in your path?
Yeah, I guess if I have any skills, that it's probably being able to get the right poem to the right person. So the questions are designed to find that. But what I did is I had 300 odd poems already printed as though they were a prescription in a file that I took
I
with
love
me.
it. Yes.
And yeah, just sort of thumb through it and find the right poem. And I know the poems really well. Sometimes I can't remember the title. I'll remember a line. So I have this notebook with, poems to recommend for grief, or poems that to remind you to be grateful, or whatever it is, and poems for weddings, and that's what there was a book from that work which was easy for me to put together because I had already done it. It's like putting together your own anthology in a way.
I love that. So you would have those, and then how many of those interactions that you had, did you have any return engagements relative to some of these individuals that you connected with? Because I have to think that that moment, that experience that person goes through when you have been there and you can so perfectly, prescribe the right poem for that right moment, that people probably want more of that from you.
Quite often explicitly, if it's at a festival or if it's an event, or conferences or whatever, it's difficult for them to have a repeat prescription. Quite often people come back, there's a bit of a circuit in the literary festivals, so that happens. People write to me a lot, and I do consultations online and on the phone as well, so that can happen now. But yeah, people would give me feedback, or every now and again someone will say, can you recommend a poem for this on social media? And so it goes on.
That's awesome. So how did the poetry pharmacy come into play?
Yeah, a couple of things. I am getting on a bit, so I'm getting too old to drive a 1970s ambulance with no power steering. And, I will be working outside, there's no heating, and it was cold or windy or wet. And it's a bit like a carnival person, you set up, I put the awning up, and
it's a big to do. It's a big thing to do for you, I would imagine.
Yeah. And I was a bit tired. And so now I haven't made life easier actually. But where I'm speaking to you from the poetry pharmacy now upstairs, and I'd been aware of this house and shop for sale, this dusty old Victorian ironmongers for a few years, and I could see you have a kind of vision. I could see all my pill bottles on the shelves and the books on the shelves, and this kind of moment of inspiration. Thought, yeah, it's a poetry pharmacy, and so now I have central heating and I don't get cold anymore.
People have to come to you as opposed to you have to go to them. So
exactly.
but that's fantastic. And so you started that with a fellow poet and partner, right?
Yeah, my partner is he's a prize-winning poet, James Sheard, and he teaches full-time at Keele University. So he was very supportive, and we set it up together. But it's me that runs it.
Oh, that's great. That's fantastic. So when people come to the poetry pharmacy, are they? Yeah, because it's explain to our audience what it is, what you'd want people to experience if they were coming in. What would they expect?
Well, it's lots of things. I kind of easily describe it as a kind of mini arts centre, a poetry arts centre. So you come in, there's a coffee shop with good cakes and good coffee. The coffee's served in little medical flasks, so there's a bit of a pharmacy theme.
I love it.
The shop itself, because it was an old ironmonger's, has got the original mahogany counter and fittings, and it looks like an old pharmacy. And the conceit is that it's been a poetry pharmacy for the last 100 years, although that's not true. But and then unusually, the books are displayed according to mental states or time of life, or particular emotional ailments. So we've got a first aid section of books that that are immediately useful, books for grief, books on seize the day, carpe diem, books through all stages of life, and that's how it's displayed in order to help people find the right poetry book, because most bookstores will have their poetry displayed A to Z, spine on, and it doesn't sell. But I have the luxury of putting the right books into the right section to help people. So we have philosophy, psychology, books on well-being, lots of books on nature as therapy. There's a consulting room where instead of a stretcher in an ambulance, I have a velvet chaise longue, and it's more like a Freudian setup now than an emergency setup. So I still do consultations here. We've got a website. We make bottles of pills, and inside the pills are extracts from poems for various ailments again. And I'm upstairs now in a workshop space, where we have readings, writing workshops, art workshops, and also we're developing a physic garden. Have you heard of a physic garden?
I have not. No, what is that?
Well, medieval apothecaries used to grow herbs and plant remedies. So we thought, because we're around well-being, we're going to have a writer's hut in an apothecary's garden.
Wow.
With herbs and things that you can make some tea and have in the writer's hut. So there's quite a lot going on here.
Wow. Yeah, it sounds like a magical experience for anybody that comes in. So are they there to buy the books, to just read in the shop, or do you kind of provide a little of every bit of that?
It's a bookshop.
Yep.
Yeah, so it's a bookshop here. They can have consultations as well, and we give away poems and pills. But also upstairs where I'm sitting now, there's a poetry reference library. People need to make an appointment to use that, but they can use the space. A massive poetry reference library.
So I'm really big about asking a lot of Ripple-esque questions, so that hopefully you'll be okay with that. But one of the questions that's just like screaming at me to ask is, what would you want everybody in the world to know about poetry if they didn't know anything about poetry?
That with every other art, we have an opinion. We'll stand in front of a painting and say we like it. We'll listen to a pop song and we'll say whether we like it. But with poetry, we're quite often frightened, and to say, just be a bit open-minded. There is some poetry out there that will speak to you, whether it's a song lyric, Leonard Cohen lyric, or
Yeah.
some nursery rhymes for your children. But there's poetry at weddings and funerals. There's beautiful poetry out there, and not to be frightened of it.
Not to be frightened of it. I love that. I love that. So if somebody was watching this interview on video or hearing it on the podcast, where would you suggest they start? And if there was a starting point that you might recommend, where might that be?
I think the best way to start, if you're not in the habit of reading poetry, is with a good poetry anthology. And I think there's a lot of amazing writing going on in the States in particular. There's some wonderful work. There's kind of Billy Collins, who's very well known, but there are people like Danusha Lamaris, and I would find that there's, in the UK, there's a poetry anthology called Staying Alive, which is published by Blood Axe.
Okay.
And it's available in the US. I think it's a bestseller even in the US. And it's intelligent but accessible contemporary poetry. And I would start with that one.
Yeah. Okay. Those are great recommendations. What do you think people get from what do you hope people get from the experience of a consultation with you when they come in?
I think, I've done thousands of them, and they always are uplifted in some way.
Yeah.
I think that's the word. They are heard, but also taken to a place where they are their most positive self, where they're talking about themselves at their best, and reminded of how easy it is actually to find that. So one of the questions I ask is, there's a poem by Yeats, and there's a line that says, "When you're old and grey and full of sleep and nodding by the fire." So I ask them to imagine this idealized room for when they're old and grey, and what they must have in it, what they have around them, what the room looks like. And most people want something quite simple. And for most of us, who are lucky to live in the West, those things are on the whole achievable. They want a couple of books, a comfortable chair, warmth, those things and somebody that they love that might visit them, and but those things are achievable.
Oh, I love that. And so you really get more of a picture of what they're thinking about it, down the road in terms of what they really want, which kind of helps anchor probably you to what they might be needing right now, here and now.
Yes, and how much of the things that they fundamentally need for themselves that they've already got, and that disconnect between, if you want something and it's so simple, why don't you have it now?
Yeah.
Space to think, or to look out at trees, or listen to birdsong, or whatever it is that they want to do, that they should be doing it now, I suppose.
Yes, that's amazing. Well, when I first, found the website and I started reading, I was thinking, okay, this was genius, because at the time, we're in the middle of the pandemic, and in the, the world is very much challenged on many levels, whether it's the uncertainty on the pandemic or war, or just in how people treat one another today. And the thing that really spoke to me was the ability for you to find, like you mentioned, those snippets, that right poem for the right time, and be able to get that to that person, something that would actually speak to their heart. Because what I really walked away from looking at the website was, it was not so much a bookshop, but an experience and an opportunity to really get an experience in a way that somebody feels like they are, being recognized, and they're being seen, and to a certain degree being heard.
Yeah, I describe it as a kind of a remedy of a kind of old-fashioned service, or an old-fashioned kind of, it feels like a a place for nostalgia and for time slowing down. That this town is it's a pretty place in the middle of nowhere in the hills, and people come here to walk, and it's much slower pace of life, and people will come in here and get a warm welcome. They can sit as long as they like. There's no sense that they have to, I want them to stay, to sit and take time over the coffee and read some books, read some poetry, and join in with whatever's happening.
Well, so did you ever believe when you first started doing this it would turn into what it has become? I mean, you have quite the following, and you have quite the reputation. So you really have hit on something that's pretty phenomenal. But did you envision this, or has it just been a surprise that it's kind of evolved the way it has?
The ambulance in the first place got quite a lot of media attention, and I was surprised by the book, and then there was a second book, and then that was a shock, I think, because once you're out there, doing, and you make those connections with other poets and publishers, and you're part of that, and it's a small literary world in the UK, really. That was the biggest shock. I think the Poetry Pharmacy itself was a big vision. It's been a lot of work, and I've been, I have people to help, but not much, so I'm still doing the hoovering in the morning and cleaning the toilet and getting the cakes out. It's very small. It has more reach. I mean, you and your ripples, it has more ripple than its size. We've been, the BBC came and filmed the day we opened.
Wow.
We had German breakfast television come and film, and it does have an effect, but we are a very quiet little town, and so it's very odd. I think the people in the town have no idea that there is this other ripple thing going on.
Well, yeah, they need to realize they have a rock star amongst them.
Yeah, they do. No one's ever said that to me before.
I mean, so at some point there'll be a plaque out front. Here is Deborah. You need to be in this shop, because there'll be a line around the block to come in. At some point you'll have a bodyguard. It'll work out.
I think maybe not. I think if this shop were, this Poetry Pharmacy were replicated in other places, it would be extraordinary. But people have to go right out of their way to find us. It's very out of the way. But it's
since you mentioned that, can you give everybody sort of a perspective of where you are in the UK, and how, if they were traveling over there, or hopefully we'll have this seen and heard by people in your own country that didn't know, so they'll come and see you. But how do they get there? And just give us a perspective there.
We're right on the Welsh border. if I look out the window, I can see into Wales, so we're right on the kind of margins, and we're halfway up Wales. If you go to Birmingham and turn left, that's where we are, and it's beautiful hill country. It's a lovely place, so it's worth a visit.
Well, I'm going to come. I mean, now I have a reason to come. There was my biggest love of the UK is Manchester United, which is my favorite soccer team, and they're not doing too well. So, and I know that reaction. So you must not be a Man U fan, but
no, I'm not into football. I'm vaguely aware of it happening.
Vaguely aware. I love that. Yeah.
But I grew up in the sound of the Spurs, Tottenham Hotspur.
Oh, there you go. Well,
that's my club, really.
I was a soccer coach for 28 years, and one of my best players that played for me since he was 7 until he graduated high school last year is a Hotspurs fan through and through, and they've had a much better run the last few years than we have.
Yeah. I used to live on White Hart Lane. How do we end up talking football? Yeah.
Well, I know he'll watch this, and now he will become an instant fan of yours just by connections.
It was a long time ago.
Oh, well, so how did you end up where you are now? I mean, it's small town, like you said, kind of off the beaten path. So how did your journey lead
Well,
you there?
I kind of it's following my own kind of wisdom in a way. It's a good place to live. It's a slow town. It's beautiful. There's a good community. People don't lock their doors at night. Don't tell anyone. But, it's safe. It's just a lovely place to be. It's a wise place to be, I think.
Yep. Oh, that's great. How long have you been there?
In this town about 3 years, but my children were born just up the road, so I've been around here for 35 years or something.
That's great. And how many kids do you have? In
Two boys.
Two boys.
How about you, Steve?
I have two boys as well.
I do.
Yeah, two boys. One that is 23 and one that's about to be 19. So how about your boys?
They're 25 and 29. Yeah.
So do they have the full appreciation that their mom is a rock star? I mean,
yeah. Okay. No, I'm not a rock star, but they were hideously embarrassed by me having an ambulance parked outside. And sometimes I'd have to pick them up from school or something, and they go, can you just park it around the corner? And why can't you be normal, Mum? But when they've come round to, they kind of like it, but they have no interest. I've put them off poetry, I think. It's quite ironic, isn't it?
Well, my parents always told me that, you lose your brain when you're a teenager. You get a little bit of it back in your 20s. Eventually, by the 30s and 40s, they'll come back to have a full appreciation for the impacts that you've made. I mean, if you think about it, like you mentioned, you've had thousands of these interactions, all the lives that you've touched. When, that in its own right is a legacy. But at the end of the day, when they look and have a true appreciation for what you really have done to contribute to the world, it's pretty phenomenal.
No. That's very kind, but I'm not sure.
I think it's true. I really do. I think every interaction that you've had, every person that's crossed your path has been bettered because they've gotten to meet you and because you've had this experience. Because like you said, I mean, it's just for a kind of this, brief moment of time, but that magic can last a lifetime.
Yeah. It's hard to take the praise, I guess, but I believe very much in having interactions that are meaningful. The rest I'm not particularly interested in that. And so they are real, and that's a nice thing, and they are always positive. And because I think sometimes people do work that's therapeutic, and quite often they'll get the dark side. I get some of the darkness, but
Sure.
I take them on a journey to a positive place, and so it's uplifting for both of us. Sometimes there are sad stories, but
sure,
we're talking out of a place of hope, and that's a nice thing.
Yeah.
And it seems to have hit on something that makes people feel a bit better, even in the moment.
Yeah, I think the reality is that, all of us need that, and we may not recognize it or may not see it in ourselves, but to have that experience, to have a moment of positivity and, like you said, hope in a world that, there's not a lot in today's world. And sometimes, with the pressures of social media and everybody's sort of just this rapid pace of life, we don't often take the time to stop and recognize how something like this experience could really be, it could completely change somebody's perspective in their life in a big way. And so I don't think you give yourself enough credit, because I mean, I know a lot of Ripplers, but you are tops on that list. I mean, you are creating some really significant positive ripples for the world.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So if your boys don't believe that yet, then you can show them this video, and
they'll think you're a crazy American man. What does he know?
Yeah, probably. I get that a lot, so it's okay. They can get in line.
Yeah.
Well, so I have a few other Ripple questions I'd like to ask you, and they're just a little bit unique. But what would be the best thing you could have a friend, a family member, a colleague, or maybe someone that comes to the store say about you?
What's the best thing?
Yeah, what would be the best thing you could hear them say about you?
Um, the best thing, and I'm lucky, you know, I've set it up, haven't I? But that they feel welcome,
I
I
love that.
suppose. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great answer. What would be the best piece of advice that you picked up as a younger person, maybe from your parents, a teacher, or someone important to you in life, maybe somebody who led you to poetry initially, but what's a piece of advice that you learned that you still utilize today?
I was going to say something really. The first thing that came to mind was something frivolous. You know that your body when you're in your 20s is great. But that's nothing to do.
But I agree. I understand. I can relate.
You know,
Yeah.
I didn't like it. What
Yep.
an idiot.
Like just to go back, just to have
Yeah.
the do-over. Yep.
Yeah. Even 40, you know. Yeah. Should I give you a sensible answer?
Sure, go. Feel free. Yeah.
Well, I'm not sure if it's. I have. It was some advice, and I can't remember where it came from, but it's the advice that I would pass on, I suppose, and that is, is to give more than, yeah, and to give and give and to be generous first without expecting anything in return.
Oh, I love that.
But it will come back to you, actually. And I think, sounds very hippie, doesn't it? But
No,
I
not at
believe
all. No, actually, it's the definition I share with the ripple, right? Which is you create a positive action on behalf of someone, whether it's somebody you know or a complete stranger. The ripples that you create ripple out, but they ripple back to you in ways that you can't
yeah,
often
they do.
expect.
Yeah.
And
And
you
the
do
older,
enough of it.
yeah, as you age, that's so true, isn't it? It just
Yep,
comes back around, and
it does.
yeah.
Absolutely. So what do you think the next 5 years looks like for you? So 5 years from now, when we get back on our probably our third or fourth follow-up to this great interview, what will life look like at that point?
Well, I'm really old, I wish I had started, I wish I had the poetry pharmacy when I was, I don't know, maybe 40 and not in my 50s. And lots of people my age are retiring and thinking about retiring, and I've just started a new business, and so there, I don't know, 5 years. It's really, I'm doing some interesting collaborations with people, and lots of people keep coming to me to do interesting things, whether it's Lush, the bath bomb
Uh-huh.
people. Do you know the company
Yeah.
that I'm doing some work with them to bring poetry into their spa treatments, in some way. And I'm also maybe doing some work with a GP training conference to talk to GPs about they're called general practitioners in the States, doctors,
Yeah.
to to develop listening skills and to develop ways of establishing intimacy without being invasive, to ask questions about the wider person, not just about their medical conditions, and to remember that. So that'd be quite interesting.
Oh, yeah.
Also, I don't know, the poetry pharmacy seems to work as an idea. The idea of how the bookshop is laid out unusually. And I suppose if I was, my secret ambition, don't tell my partner, is that there is another one somewhere,
Yeah.
and that this place, even when I'm not running it, carries on in some way.
Absolutely. Well, those are all very great things to strive for without question.
Maybe.
Yeah, no, I think it's amazing. I do have one question that is more personal related, because my mom suffered from Alzheimer's for 10 years before she passed. And, there's a lot of studies that show that music, is one of those things that sort of brings people back into the present, even for just a short period of time. But you hit on something that really I'd never even thought of, which was that poetry and that experience. If someone has, an aging parent or grandparent that they're trying to navigate those waters, how might you suggest they go about using poetry to maybe connect with them in what's probably an uncomfortable situation, because those can be challenging times.
There are, I think poetry has a lot in common with music. It has those repeated refrains, it has musicality, it's easily digestible. And lots of an older generation learned poetry by heart. So you can find some old poems, and you'll find if you read it to them, they'll read along, they'll remember and speak it out with you, like the words of a song. But there are other ways of using poetry. And one of the things that I used to do was to ask questions that are not to do with time, and sit and maybe think about some questions that you can ask that person that are, I don't know, to talk about kite flying. And you don't have to talk about your memory of kite flying, but, just talk about the idea. Take a poem that's about flying a kite, take a kite, fly the kite, do the thing itself in the present, or play a piece of music, some music that has something about birds in it, or play them some bird song, talk about birds. Don't talk about remember when we would listen to birds, but talk about, ask questions that are, not can you remember, but here's a photograph of the sea, and then they'll just talk about the sea, and you can talk about the sea and be in the present with them.
That's that's just some amazing wisdom right there. Thank you for that. That's great. So my final question is, I talk about the ripple effect. What does the ripple effect mean to you, though?
The ripple effect, what, in terms of where it goes from here, or I mean, it's the ripples are crossed ripples, and lots of stones in the pond. So there's things rippling out from here, and then things that the ripples from other things that come back and cross over. That's a really mixed.
No, I love it. It's a great. No, it
means a lot. It means that my friend Pat, who's downstairs in the cafe, always wanted to run a cafe, but she also runs, she's a published poet, she was a teacher. She runs Welsh Pool Poetry Festival, which is a small poetry festival up the road. So I don't know this. So I've got posters for her festival in this shop. She's here talking to my customers about poetry, and those small ripples. But also, I don't know. It goes on, doesn't it? That I'll you'll do a kind act for somebody, and then they come back and offer you something in return.
Yep, absolutely. That's a great definition for sure. So I would be remiss if I didn't ask, because I'm sure my audience would want to know. But do you what would be your all-time favorite poetry book?
Oof.
I'll put you on the spot. So
well, can I have two?
Sure, you can have as many as you want. So
the first one, I have to say this because it's my partner's last collection, and it's called Abandoned Settlements by James Sheard, and he dedicated it to me. And there are poems in there written for me and some other women, but we won't talk about that. And then and then I guess I mentioned it earlier. I think the book that I would take on a desert island, if I had only one book to take, is the Blood Axe anthology, Staying Alive, because it has so much in there. It's so rich. And if I'm a fangirl for anything, it's for the editor of that book, and he started the publisher Blood Axe, Neil Astley. Not many people have an editor as their hero, but
hey, that's great. I love it. Yeah. Well, we'll have to send this once we have the video out. We'll have to send it to him so he knows that you're trying to. I mean, that would be a completely different ripple, but who knows? It would make him smile. I'm sure. It's making you smile, so that works. And so
Yeah.
you have a couple of books of your own. So can you share those titles so that our audience knows those? And are they available on Amazon? Can they get them directly from your website?
Um, yeah, well, I've edited a few books.
Okay.
I think the book I'm most proud of actually is a book that I edited, which is called #Me Too.
Okay.
And you can get that in the States from
Okay.
Amazon. I don't like mentioning Amazon as an independent bookseller, but you
Yeah.
know,
Yep.
on Amazon. And then I edited a poem anthology called These Are the Hands, which is poems from the NHS, and it's from the staff throughout the NHS, from the cleaner to the heart surgeon, writing about their experiences from within the NHS. I have my own poetry collection, which is called Dirty Laundry, but that is a bit rude, so maybe I wouldn't recommend that one necessarily. And then two poetry anthologies from the Emergency Poet work, and they're both available there, I think.
Great. Well, and how do people just, we'll of course put the link up on our show notes, but how do people find out more information about you, follow you if you have social media, but share the website so that everybody knows to get on. And I assume you can get, like on a newsletter or, some sort of mailing list for the shop.
Yeah, it's poetrypharmacy.co.uk is the website. You can subscribe through the website for newsletters, but quite a lot. I don't write them very often because I'm quite busy, but we do have lots of events here, so they may not be very, applicable to your audience in the States. But yeah, and newsletter about. I've just employed somebody, this is very grown up, to do some marketing. So there will be more news about what happens here, not just sort of silence.
I love that. And I liked how you framed it as a grown-up, act to get that going. Because I had to do the same with Cynthia, who led me to you in the first place, right?
Okay. It is a grown-up act.
It's helpful, right, to have, sort of an adult in the room that leads our entrepreneurial minds to something of direction.
Definitely. This is a work of complete self-indulgence, really, isn't it? This kind of mad, exploded brain.
Yeah, I love it. I think it's amazing. I am so grateful to know you, and we may end this podcast, but we're going to strike up a friendship here that's going to last forever. So
Nice.
I'm a big believer in whatever I can do to help people, and I'm going to be singing your praises and promoting the heck out of what you're doing, because I think the work you're doing is amazing.
You're very kind. That's very generous of you. Thank you.
Of course. Well, it's that ripple. So it will ripple this on, and more people need to know about it, because it's an incredible, you have an incredible story. You have an incredible offer to the world, and people do need to know about it. I'm going to be interviewing somebody that does creative writing workshops in California. And I happened to mention to her what you were doing. She was like, I knew nothing about this, but got on your website, and I believe probably has signed up for your newsletter, but she was completely enamored with what you're doing. So we just have to, get these ripples out to the world so that they can all discover how, the amazing work you're doing. Do you still drive the ambulance at all? I've got to ask.
No, I sold it. Sold it. It broke my heart. Terrible. But it was sitting in the backyard, rusting. So somebody loves it. But yeah, it's very sad. I know.
Well, that's okay. You had the experience at the time for both of them. So, I mean, that's still pretty amazing. But
I did cry. I cried.
I highly encourage my audience to go and check out the website, because it is a really well done website, and it really gives you kind of a real appreciation and a feel for what you've created there. But Deborah, you're amazing, and so I encourage you to keep up the great work.
And you too. Thank you so much. What a lovely opportunity. And it's great to meet you.
Yeah, great to meet you as well. And I will let you know when this comes out. It'll be a few weeks, but I can't wait to see the reaction, because it's going to be huge. So you have a great rest of your day. I know we're 6 hours time difference, so I appreciate you making time during your busy day to be on the Ripple Effect podcast.
Easier for me than it is for you, I think.
No, this is my pleasure. I love doing this. So it's so great to finally meet you face to face, and I can't wait to meet you in real life someday soon. So
I hope you come. It's been a great
absolutely.
pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, you take care. Have a great rest of your day. And as always, ripple on.
You too. Take care.
Take
Bye,
care.
Steve.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye.